All right, what's up, Giga Gamers? Welcome to the Strat Chat. Today we're going to be going over how to build a draft, how to draft. All right, this is for competitive only. You can use small elements of this in solo queue, but largely this is for organized teams. There's still a lot of mistakes that go on, so there's a few things that I want to go into. Some of them have nothing to do with ebb and flow of metagames. It's just mechanics of drafting. For example, if you know that you can get a pick later in the draft, you don't need to take it early. If you know what your pick is, there is nothing benefited by taking it early. There's I should say, by hovering it early, you gain nothing. If you think longer and you know what you're going to do, it's just allowing them to think longer. So unless you're planning to do some mind games, which comes to like the next levels of things, you just don't need to do it. If you know that you're going to pick Kaisa Rel on R1, R2, then you should just do it, and you do it immediately to send it back to them, right? And that way they think on their time, you can think on their time, and hopefully most of the, at least first half of the draft can be scripted based on the metagames and expectations. So getting to that scripted part, the role of an analyst on a team, the way I've envisioned it, the way that I believe it, you have two positions that help you prepare for drafts. You have your players and your coaches that are going to give you an idea of how strong champions are, and they may put together this list right here. Now, you may have an analyst finding like, hey, look, this build is winning at X percentage, but I think that should be more the role of a coach. A coach should be looking around the world to see if there's a build that's popping up somewhere. Instead, you should have the coaches and the players coming together to give a relative value to each champion, okay? And what you want to do is from 0.7 to 1, give every champion a score. Now, in the case of something being broken, as we saw from Caps with Nico, that he completely changed the game with his Nico play, you can go as high as a 1.1. The idea is that you're going to try to create a score from your draft, and we're going to have little multipliers that will show us how much we anticipate how much of an expected win value we can get coming out of a draft. Now, there's other considerations. It's not just about get the high score possible, because there's other factors that can go like this composition counters that composition, or this champion counters that one. And so you're going to have to build in multipliers in there. But to start, you're going to have this raw score, okay? Just where do you think the champion is, all right? And so Ivern being, I think, is the most powerful champion on the patch. Nico was broken, though. There's a couple things that you can do that completely change the game, so it's Nico or bust in a lot of situations, so you can go here. But your normal high score is going to be 99.9%, all right? Basically, how much do we think we can get out of our position if we pick this champion? If we think we can get everything, then this is your score, all right? And we have different ranks for different champs as you go. This is all going to be based on 1321, the world's meta. As you go and you build your tier list, right, and you kind of throw things here, you're starting to give these values, basically things that are out of meta, that are less strong than they could be, can get as low as like a 0.8. And the reason that you're going to need decimals here, this is for the statisticians, you don't want to have too much of a spread, and you do want to have enough decimal places so that you can create good visuals for what's going on in the champions. Now, this is a pretty big spread, right? 1.1 to 0.8 is very, very large, and you would never want to have a 0.8 in any situation where you could avoid it. Sometimes you have to based on bans. But this is the sort of like unplayable champion that doesn't even make it onto a tier list. Whereas this is like the bottom champions that have been nerfed enough that you could play them in a pinch, but you're basically not going any lower. So each champion gets a score, and I gave you some samples right here. And note stipulations could be something like with Rumble must have lockdown. All right. If you draft a Rumble, you must therefore go for lockdown champions afterwards. Otherwise, this value might drop, and you might even put a cell that gives them a negative multiplier, right? Something that brings this back down. It's, for example, if you're playing Yasuo needs to have knockups. He needs to have enablers. Otherwise, he's not that good of a champion. Even if he hard counters the enemy Twisted Fate, you can't just pick Red 5 Yasuo. unless you also have knockups. And if you have knockups, it enables the champion. It allows them to play that the way they should. LS suggests that Karthus is very good, but only if you have 3 ADs. You need to have 3 AD champions to make sure that it's not equitable for them to buy MR. Therefore, you get the full power of Karthus. So it's things like this. After you give your scores, all right, then you're going to give synergy scores. All right, you're going to have every other champion and basically give extra values if there's a notable synergy. So, for example, Alistar can definitely set up Jhin, and your Jhin Alistar score can have a little bit of a multiplier. Jarvan with Orianna, very simple synergy. Azir with Jarvan, also very strong because it gets the extra attack speed, plus the ability to set people up where you can bump them and then Jarvan can scoop them up afterwards. Or Jarvan can Cataclysm, and when they flash out, Azir can go and scoop them back in, or you can shape team fights around. So those sorts of synergies, on top of other ones like Renata and Kalista, both having on-hit auto attacks that feed off of and require your teammate to attack. So when they both have it, you know that both people want to do it and they'll do it together. Xayah Rakan, another obvious synergy. Then you go and you create your database of the world. Now, this is the job of the advanced scout, all right? So you have scouts that are looking at all the players around the world, how they're performing, and they're basically constantly updating this list based on a weighted system for recency, all right? You're going to bias based on recent patches, right? Did they perform well on Aatrox always? Do they perform well on Aatrox when it's in meta, but they don't play it when it's out of meta? Sort of thing. You want to have grades that go along about 1.5 years back, where you're getting full value for the current patch. You're getting like 90% value based on what happened for the previous 6 months, and 80% value the 6 months before that, and half value the same way that they do it in tennis rankings, where you get full value for your year score, plus you actually get some residual for last year, so that way you don't just randomly bump out of the top 10 just because you get injured. You're going to go through and give scores to different players on these champions, as high as 1. All right, 1 being they get every last drip out of this champion. All right, so BLG Bin on Jax is a good example. This is a 1.000. Just, I expect them to get every last bit out of Jax. Sometimes some people innovate and they break the mold. They change the way the game is played. And that's what happened with Caps on Nico. And basically, after he played it, it got permabanned. It was not permabanned before that. It actually hit a streak of so many bans in a row that it made it into, I believe, most banned champion at Worlds, even though it was nowhere close to start. He just bamboozled Yahoo to the point where, as that game was continuing, you could see moments where it's like, Nico's vulnerable right now, but the enemy team's like, I don't know, like there's some tricks, because he did the cannon trick. He swapped into 4 different characters in and out of lanes, coming out of bushes. He was pretending to be on a Nautilus roam timer and coming back. He was making the game so damned complicated for the enemy team that it was like Nocturne Paranoia was just on all the time. He was misinforming all the time. And based on that, his team got away with situations where they should have been punished, but it was constantly like, no, I don't know. I don't know if that's the real Nico. Like, I don't know if that's Xayah or if it's Nico, or just like, let's just do something standard. Let's go to the other side of the map. When someone plays a champion to that level, then you give it the 1.1. Then you expect other people to catch up. So in about 2 weeks' time, you can expect these pros to get 50 games in on that champion, meaningful practice, trying to push the boundaries. They're going to watch that clip of Caps play, and they're going to watch every single movement he does and emulate and copy. And maybe as soon as 4 days later, they might have it ready, although they probably didn't have it ready and scrimmaged and prepared for a draft. So sometimes you don't need to react within the first week, but by the second week, you should expect pros around the world to be able to emulate what Caps is doing, at least to come close, right? He changes the rules of the game. That's why we have to go over and give Nico that 1.1 over here, because suddenly, like, her new ceiling is just here. We thought it was here, now it's here. She was already playable here, and now she's doing all these other things, and you have to react. What ends up happening is you end up with this formulaic table, right? It's going to give you all of these values. It's important to have your own team and your opposing team. And as you go through, you're going to look for gaps. All right, you're going to try to find out where the gaps are and which champions you have much more effect with than they do. Those are definitely ones that you don't need to ban, that you can expect to pick, and you might have opportunities to play those. And that's something that happened in game 1 of the World Finals, and it kind of drove us nuts that it was allowed. We went through in the pregame. If you guys were watching live, then you know. If you weren't, make sure you sub and stay tuned, because we're always there trying to talk about as many of these permutations as possible. But this pick right here ruined the game. You could argue that YONE put the team on his back. There's a very good video by Chippys, former top laner. He's a pro coach. You should absolutely watch it. It's how YONE broke down the game. So, check that video out. I'll put a link in the description below. But when you're playing and you go through this draft, Azir Orianna is meh. It's like there's enough mid laners that are close together that you don't necessarily need to take away one or take away the other. By banning Azir, you basically necessitated that they ban Orianna. You could have gone for this YONE pick, or specifically, don't pick Aatrox yet, because YONE is ZEUS's favorite counter into Aatrox. He annihilated other Aatroxes, and we already saw that the Shy, in, I believe, 4 out of 6 opportunities to pick blind, picked Aatrox. So this became a very, very foreseeable system, and we spent the majority of the pregame talking about this, that Weibo needs to find a way to get out of this situation. And they might even want to pick red side to do it, to make sure that the Shy gets counterpick. What ends up happening, they blind pick Aatrox, ZEUS takes YONE and counters, and steamrolls the game. Wins alone, fumbles twice, still has such a huge advantage that even with extra pressure up in the top lane, completely claps the Aatrox. Aatrox was a complete non-factor in the team fights. He didn't do anything. It was not pretty. And what did they do to get it? They got Maokai Jace, which, yes, this is a great synergy. This is one of those champions where you might pick a 1.1 together, where you're saying, okay, Jace really wants someone to lock them down. You've got physical damage and magical, so they work together very well. They also both siege. They both also disengage. They both have a knockback, and Maokai has the ability to press forward. So you actually kind of check a lot of boxes for what you might want from a team comp in Maokai Jace. This combination was extremely prevalent in China and on Cloud9, right? They used a lot of this. Blabber, I believe, was like 12-0 at one point on Maokai. Some of those were paired with Jace's. There's a lot of reasons to do it, but the champions did get nerfed. I don't think personally that there should have been as high of a priority on Maokai as there was in the tournament. I don't think he had a very good record. A lot of it had to do that he was picked blue 1. And by using that blue 1 pick, you're basically saying this is the entirety of our advantage in the draft lies in this pick. Because all the rules that red team have to follow, they have rules. Like red team has rules, blue team doesn't have so many rules. If there is 1 or 5 OP champions left after draft, blue team runs away with it, okay? It's not close. You take 1, I take 1 and a counter pick. You take 2, I take the other. All right. 3-2 in OPs. We are just significantly higher than you based on the scores that we've given the champions. Or you take 1, we take 2, you take 2, we get a counter pick. And that's it. The value of the counter pick needs to outweigh those OPs, or it's not going to do anything. Most commonly, early in the draft, we saw Xayah. It shouldn't have been Xayah. It should have been Rakan, because Rakan has more good pairings than Xayah does. But Xayah has some disengage qualities that can be attractive for certain compositions, especially if you're going to go with poke comps, for example. But in this draft, Xayah Rakan was actually available, right? We actually could have seen Xayah Rakan right off the bat. But because we saw Maokai, they end up with the strongest bot lane, Kalista Renata. It gets answered with Jace Aatrox, and this is where I think it should have been answered with Xayah Rakan, right? You go Xayah Rakan, then you ask them, what are you willing to take Are you going to take a jungler so we don't pinch the jungle pool? Are you going to blind pick a laner and then figure out where to put it later, whether or not it's going to be flexed to other lanes? That's something red team can do, but at least you're answering Xayah Rakan. And then in the bans, they're probably still going to have to ban Jace. They might have to ban Aatrox, because if they don't and you ban Aatrox, then, or sorry, and you ban Yone, then that might force them in a uncomfortable position where they might want to first pick Aatrox, for example, or they might go Renekton and say, I dare you to try to come up with a good answer. I think it would have given them a lot more options going into the draft. Some people will posit that game 1 of a best of 5 is a good time to limit test and see, like, can I actually beat this champion? I don't think it's worth the L. It really is not, because when you're talking about these scores, right, and let's say Caps' Nico is 1.1 and Bin's Jax is 1.0, are you really willing to risk a game just to find out if you can play against it? It takes like an exceptional amount of hubris to believe that. You're saying that there's something that I've figured out. It can't just be let's find out. It needs to be there's something I have figured out about the way that that guy plays that no one else is exploiting that I can exploit. And if that comes up, great. You can do it, and then you can say, let me try my answer. But it can't just be, no, I think I can do it. No Yone has ever beaten me on my Aatrox, so I'm feeling pretty good about it. You have to know that you have to know exactly what you are doing differently than other champions. As we got into game 2, then we found another foul. All right, so this game we saw a Sylas ban. Sylas ban is something that you basically need to do if you want to grab Maokai, because the multiplier that the enemy team gets for picking Sylas after you get Maokai is huge, right? And you can get general ideas from these. You can go into a site like Lolalytics and you go to this normalized synergy data and you can see like what champions are good with each other. This is Maokai jungle. Looks good with assassins, makes a lot of sense. Tristana mid makes a ton of sense. I've got long range engage, she can jump in, mixed damage types, everything about it says Maokai Tristana should be a fantastic combination, right? As you go through, you can start changing this data and you want to practice it on your own. Scrims you can take some value from, but again, most teams should not be scrimming. They should have their second 5 and they should be mixing and matching, and they should be playing 5v5s, and they should do things like mid and top lane go and swap teams, and then like let's battle, or bot lane swap teams, let's battle, and try to even the playing field. Sort of like put Michael Jordan with the 4 bench players and put Scott Burrell in with the starters for the Bulls. You play them against each other 5-on-5 and see what happens, and try to gain some information about how your starting team should play against a superstar, for example. But one of those fouls, just a hard line. If you plan on playing Maokai, you should definitely ban Sylas. Faker's been playing tons of Sylas in the tournament, much more comfortable on these melee assassin types. This is how he came up. He got famous on Zed, so let's not assume for a minute that he can't play Akali Sylas types anymore, and we saw all of them. So you ban Sylas, you pick Maokai. Great. This time around, again, Xayah Rakan is left open, but this time, blue 3, they start with Kalista, and that says, okay, this necessitates a Renata ban, or a Renata take, but now we're going to take not only a good Renata pairing, but a pairing that counters Kalista. So now we've got, out of this draft, congratulations, you've picked Kalista, we've counterpicked you completely, and picked for a comparison or for a companion with Renata that's very, very strong. Then they picked Senna. Like, I don't get any world where you don't want Senna into Draven ever. Like, that's one of those ones where you're like, yank it down a level. Absolutely don't want Senna. Not only that, but then they pick Maokai. Notice that there's no Sylas ban. Immediately picked up Sylas blind here. They go ahead and they ban champions that would be good in front to back and poke, which will give Sylas the most space in the fights. This time we see an answer going further into the draft. We say, all right, ban Cassante, we ban Yone. This time, okay, we'll take Nocturne Blind. We'll take Aatrox Ari. We still think that Aatrox is him. We think the Shy is him. It's, you know, we got rid of Yone. That must have been the one thing that could stop us. No, it turns out Gwen crushes Aatrox as well. And you get these wins in the draft with these multipliers, these counter picks, saying like, I can win with such strength in one position that it's going to give me a big lead as we get into team fights. And again, there is literally nothing that Weibo can count as an advantage in this game. This one was a little bit closer. They could say, you know, we could come out of a draft saying that these 5 champions is one of the best 5 rosters you could come up with. The problem is that Kalista Renata get to all in against Tahm Kench, double range against the Frog means I get to poke them down, and then once they're ready, they get to all in. Senna can't withstand that pressure. And Yone hard counter into Aatrox. Like, again, there's no single place where you can say that you got a big advantage. Even Maokai into Lee Sin was not playable because the mid laners all had the push on T1. They all get to push. Therefore, Lee Sin gets to go and dominate Maokai. And we saw that Yone just created a 3-stacked crash and he hovered into the jungle while Lee Sin invaded Maokai. And you could argue that that game was over. Like I would say that the draft made it over, but by 3.5 minutes into the game, it was pretty clear cut who was going to win. All right, so we've learned a couple lessons. As coaches, during these games as they play out, your job is not to be a fan. Your job is to be a coach. And so that means you're taking notes, you're summarizing, you're planning, you're preparing what you're going to tell your players. So for example, NRG's coach ThinkCard should have realized that FBI was tilted out of his mind. Not from like traditional tilt, just was at that, what's the psych idea, the concept of too much stress, where a little bit of anxiety is good for performance, all right? That much has been proven. Too much can have adverse effects where you start kind of riding the roller coaster, or at times you just have this precipice where you just might, boom, like plummet because you get so wired that your body just like stops functioning well. That's what happened to FBI, at least what it looked like. The cameramen were all over it. As a coach, you need to be prepared to soothe that person or amp them up or amp teammates up, whatever it is you know about your team's dynamic, about who the leaders are and who responds to strength or whatever cues your team needs. That's what you need to be thinking about going into the next game. And as a coach talking about drafts, you should always assume that your team is going to lose if you're at 2-0 or that it's going to win at 0-2. There should be no time spent here. If you're 0-2, you're Weibo Gaming, 0 time spent assuming what if loss. Doesn't do you any good. If you lose, you're out. So there is nothing to think about in this crunch time. Instead, you have to assume that you're going to win. And if you win, you're going to have to figure out, all right, where did our win come from? Because once we go into this win, we're going to have to start thinking about the next game's draft. All right? Sorry, this should be here. You're all ready. Let's undo that. Let's put it here. This is after your game 3 draft. You're going into the waiting room. You're watching with your crew. You've got 10 people in that room. You want to be ready for game 4. Game 4 doesn't do you any good assuming that you might lose or thinking you might lose. So if you come out of this game, you're going to have to figure out, where did the win come from? All right? Okay. We figured out a much better draft. Their draft got better and better and better now that they stopped playing with hubris and started playing with their brains. But again, we found some mistakes. So if you're taking Azir, you're giving Xayah Rakan. Normally when these champions are up, now that more of the bot lane has been pinched and we're not giving away just ridiculous Renata lanes, Renata's banned, you can take Rakan here, not Xayah, okay? You take Rakan because Rakan has more good pairings than Xayah does. If you go Xayah, you might be pinched a little bit, especially with some champions gone, depending on what gets taken on this side as well. And then you can give Azir, and then you can play for your counter, and you can say, all right, we have Azir, or they have Azir, we'll pick Akali, we're comfortable here. In this case, Azir was taken. Now you're letting enemy team know, okay, I don't need to pick Akali yet, but I'm gonna pick her in R3. So now I can go for power. I can go Xayah Rakan, which is the strongest thing I can do, picking my strong bot lane together, forcing enemy team to play a third tier bot lane against our top tier. And then we still get counter pick here. So now red team is just winning and winning. All right. They're much stronger bot. They're stronger mid. Okay. Well, now we're going to make sure that the Poppy gets banned because of the synergy with Azir, much more synergy with Azir than with Akali. Same thing, Cassante, we don't want people controlling the fight and moving people around because it makes Azir's job too easy. We take away those. They take away, well, I don't know why. Wukong, presumably because they didn't want to get bullied in the jungle. And Jace, because Jace is seen as a strong pick against Azir, but Jace is not necessary. Akali is going to be here. If ZEUS has an Akali score, then maybe you have to ban Jace. Maybe you don't want to deal with Jace in the top lane with some matchups, and you can play out from there. Well, anyways, what do we have that happens? Okay, well, we've got a winning mid, and we've got a winning bot. What do we want? A winning jungle. So now we can go and play bot side as strong side of the map and go from there. Enemy team says, okay, the reason we banned Wukong was because we wanted Bel'Veth. Lee Sin can fight pretty well against Bel'Veth, not at level 1, but going to be a very strong champion in general. And now we're forced to blind pick again. And this is the one time where I think that T1 maybe could have gotten a little bit more out of the draft, but they pick Aatrox and they say, no, we're fine taking this. I think largely because they're saying, if we do go to game 4, we want you to still think about Aatrox as a point of strength for us, but also specifically Aatrox, very hard to whittle down. You can go into this lane and play for a safer approach and then look for windows to manipulate the game so that it favors Aatrox. This is very much like a Viper versus the Mountain sort of lane where Kennen can poke, but if you get hit by a single Q, you're probably going to be in a lot of trouble. And it doesn't even need to get that far. I'm going to show you guys a little clip. It's going to be Raptors into blue into Gromp. It's interesting to see what Lee Sin has planned coming from here. Probably just to spin back around and go back to top side and be level 4, off of a leash. So the Kennen wave's pushing in. Aatrox is going to do his best to keep it stuck there from 330 to 350. So what did we learn? From that position in that game, they got themselves a winning mid, a winning bot, and then they treated their game to create a winning top as well. This is how T1 completely crushed Weibo Gaming from a mental point. You could say that these games ended in the first 5 minutes. It was all about, you'd still have to execute and you have to, take your game plan, but they got such monumental leads by 5 minutes into every single one of these games. Really by 3 minutes and 50 seconds of every one of these games, they were feeling pretty good about their situation. And you need to do better than that, right? You can prepare for the first 4 waves of the game. You can prepare your strategies. You can use this sort of system for finding where you're going to have powerful iterations on the map, how you're going to maneuver your team, and then you can create a strategy for the early game and then manipulate the game to fit the scope that you want it to go into. Then there's a whole nother battle, but this is just about the first 4 waves of the game and the draft, something that you are basically in complete control over. You can script these things, and I expect teams at Worlds to do better. So anyways, now you guys know. Thanks for the likes, the support. Make sure you subscribe. We're going to be doing more content like this. I'm going to get into some games now.